Hello, friends. Welcome to Lab at Home. We're going to give everyone just a moment to all file in, and then we'll say hello. We'll do our opener, and then we will get started with today's experiment and activities. We have a very special guest back with us today. If you would like to say hello to our special guest, Dr. Eleanor, because this is Pollinator Week. It is National Pollinator Week, and we are celebrating by having Dr. Spicer-Rice, Dr. Eleanor Spicer-Rice in with us today. We're really happy to have her back. We had her at the very, very beginning of our bug out to talk to us a little bit about entomology. But we are gonna kind of end the bug out this week by talking about pollinators and having Dr. Eleanor back again, just to kind of talk about some of our experiences and some other stuff to illustrate kind of what pollinators do, what makes a good pollinator, and stuff like that. So we have a couple more people who have filed in. Hello there, Alexa, Rocco, Harper, Liliana, and Mia, and Julian. Let's go ahead and let's get started. So as always, our learning process is all about respect for ourselves, each other, and our world. We ask you all to show respect by using kind language and appropriate words in the chat box, as this is a program for everyone. My friend Max, as always, is moderating the chat and can disable the chat function for individual users if that's needed, but it never is. I don't think it will be. That said, it's okay to disagree or to share your feelings. We welcome all ideas that are founded in respect, and we invite all of you to do the same. So when we do the lab on site, we encourage our learners to lead with their questions and ideas. So I will be asking you all plenty of questions and hope you will share your ideas and your own questions as much as possible in the chat. As mentioned, we are wrapping up our summer bug out celebration, and we are very happy to have Dr. Eleanor here with us. Let's talk a little bit about pollinators. What is a pollinator? What does it mean to pollinate? What is pollen? If you know any of these, the answer to any of these questions, or you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear from you all. What do we think of when we hear pollinator? What does that mean? What is pollen? I know I'm allergic to it. Ooh, we think about bees. Yeah, bees are kind of like the staple pollinator for sure. Honey, we think of bees. Yeah, bees are definitely kind of what people think of when we think of pollinators. And we're going to be talking about some different species of bees today. Pollen is the dust that is sweet on flowers. Yeah, so pollen is something that a flower uses to reproduce, to make more flowers, right? And I learned recently that pollen can be a protein source for some animals who drink nectar. So I always thought it was just kind of an extra, some seasoning, but it sounds like they get some actual nutritional value out of it. That's so interesting. We have Liz also saying that they think about flowers when we are thinking about pollinators, and that is true. Flowers are a big part of pollination, and there's lots of different insects and bugs who pollinate. Ooh, butterflies, that's a great one. Let's start with a few pictures we got from our iNaturalist Bio Blitz. We had all of you guys contributing such amazing pictures. Let's take a quick look at pollinator number 1. What animal is this? What bug is this? Yeah, precisely. We have a butterfly. Very nice. Now, Dr. Eleanor, I want to ask you, do you think that butterflies are good pollinators? I know they go from flower to flower. Do you think that they do a good job as pollinators?
Well, it really depends on the flower that they're pollinating. A lot of times they can be bad pollinators because they have very long tongues, and so they can reach really far without actually pushing the pollen into the middle of the flower where it needs to be and moving it from one flower to another. But there are some flowers that cannot be pollinated without butterflies, like azalea flowers. We used to think that butterflies were just bad at pollinating everything, but very recently, a researcher team at NC State University found that azaleas would not be able to be pollinated without butterflies landing on them. And if you look at an azalea flower, they're kind of open with gentle, soft petals, and they're stamen, which is the part of the flower, the little sticks that have, or is it like little straw looking things with pollen on them, they are long and gentle. And so when a butterfly lands on the flower and brushes its wings against those stamen, it moves the pollen exactly as the flower needs to have pollen moved on it, in a way that no other type of insect can do.
That is so interesting. So they're really good pollinators for a certain kind of plant, and that is the azalea flower. I
You
love
know how Alexa says a poppy flower, and yes, it seems like I think many of us have probably seen butterflies on poppy flowers. They can also pollinate those as well, and that's a good question because if you think about the petals and the shape of a poppy flower, you think that it would be a great place for a bee to land. I mean, a butterfly to land.
also
Sorry,
a bee, maybe a bee, maybe both.
bees like them too. Yeah.
So before we kind of look at some of our other pollinators, let's talk a little bit more about what it means to pollinate, right? So I have two little flowers here. And these are some little black-eyed Susans. They're the same species, but let's say that this one is in the front yard and this one's in the backyard, right? They can still make more black-eyed Susans with both of their DNA combined, right? DNA is kind of the recipe for making a living thing, and they have to have their DNA combining to create a more diverse group of flowers. So what would be great is if the DNA from this flower could get to this flower, right? And a lot of flowers depend on pollinators, including insects, to be attracted to their petals, to drink some of that nectar, and to get pollen all over them so that when they fly to a different flower, they bring that pollen to that flower, and the DNA has been mixed. So we know that butterflies are really good at some kinds of pollination. Let's take a look at a pollinator that we might see around here, and I'm going to ask you all what we notice about it. Oh, this is a great addition from Claire. Bats are also pollinators. I always think of bees, I always think of insects, but bats are pollinators. I also learned that in some environments, lizards can be pollinators. Mammals are also pollinators. So lots of
There's
different
some
animals.
flowers that only bloom at night, hoping that bats will come to them.
So there are different flowers that are specifically adapted to bats. That's so cool. Specifically open just so bats will carry their pollen. That's amazing. Yeah, let's talk about this guy. So can you tell us about the insect that we're looking at?
Yes, I love this bee. This is such a great find. And a lot of times this is called a carpenter mimic leafcutter bee. And a lot of times people don't recognize these until they start actually looking for bees. They're pretty common around here, but they can be hard to spot. And the thing I want you to see on this bee, because they're native to North Carolina. North Carolina has more than 500 native species of bees. Honeybees are not native to North Carolina. We brought them to the United States. We brought them to North America when people colonized North America. But these bees have been here for a long time right here. And look at her bottom. If you look at her bottom, you can see that yellow underneath it. That's all pollen. That little girl right there has so much hair that she can pick up so much pollen and move it from flower to flower. They are excellent at pollinating native flowers. My neighbor has some flowers with orange pollen on them, and all of these bees have little orange bottoms because they spend all day on those flowers, and they're just so cute. I just want to squeeze them. So,
They look like they're, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm just talking about how cute they are.
They are. They look like they're wearing little pants.
They do look like they're wearing little pants. And Alexa wants to know if they're bumblebees, and they're not bumblebees, but we do have a bunch of species of native bumblebees as well. We have about, I think, 17 species of native bumblebees in North Carolina. So we have a bunch of different kinds of beautiful bumblebees in North Carolina. Bumblebees have more of a colony, like they have a queen mother with babies that go out and forage for her. But these carpenter bees, right, leafcutter bees right here that you're seeing in the picture, are solitary bees. Sometimes they live in groups, but they each have their own little hole.
That's so interesting. They're solitary. They like to fly around alone. That's so interesting. Can we take a look at another kind of bee we might see around in this area?
Oh, this says it's a sweat bee. I'm not sure if this is a sweat bee. It might be. um, because we have a bunch of different species of sweat bees, but we have a bunch of different native bees. But I can tell you about sweat bees. They like to land on people because we sweat. And if you've ever tasted your sweat, it's salty. So what's happening is they're licking up the minerals that are coming out of our skin, and they're using that to help them get nutrition. So sometimes when you're outside on a summer's day, you'll see one. I don't know about you, but I've been stung by these before. Oh, yep. See, somebody over there hates sweat bees. And they will sting you because they're so little, and you accidentally touch them and they think their lives are in danger. And so they'll give you a little prick on the wherever they've landed on you. I got stung in the eye by one earlier in the summer, and it wasn't my favorite thing that happened this summer. But they're not aggressive. They don't mean to sting you. They're just trying to save their own lives. And they're pretty cute if you look at them for a while. No, they don't bite, Alexa. And the salt does help them. Yes, they need those salts to help their bodies stay balanced. There was a question there that wondered if the salts help them. They have to have that to stay alive. Yes. So that's a sweat bee. Not everybody's favorite bee, I'd say, but certainly some of the cuter bees. Some species of sweat bees, what they'll do is that when they go to sleep at night, they have to have shelter to stay safe at night. So some male sweat bees will fly into morning glories, which close at night. And so they'll fly in and they'll bite down on the flower in the middle of it. And the morning glory will close around them and make a little bee house for the bee at night. And when then the flower opens in the day, they'll fly out and continue about their day. So even though they can be aggravating to people, they still are pollinators, and they have some pretty adorable habits.
That is adorable, having a little bee house made out of a morning glory. That's so funny.
Oh, here's an important question here. If a sweat bee stings you, does it die after? No, she does not die after she stings you. In fact, the only bees that die after they sting you are honeybees. And the reason honeybees die after they sting you is because they have a little hook on their stinger that rips the stinger out of its body and leaves it in your body. And when it rips it out of its body, the venom sac that is in the honeybee is also ripped out of your body, and it continues to pump venom into your body from that. So then the honeybee, after she stings you, she has all of her organs have fallen out and she can't survive. But most bees' stingers are just pointy and they have no barb on them, and they can sting you again and again. But they don't like to sting you. They usually only sting in self-defense. Also, only females can sting.
Huh.
In case anybody was wondering. Oh yeah, the question is, can all bees sting? No, some bees can't sting. There's a species of bee in South America called stingless honeybees, and they have these little tubes, and they come out and they don't sting you, but they try to frighten you. So they'll like buzz in your face and say, I could sting you if I wanted to, but they can't. So not every bee can sting.
That's so interesting. I thought that was something that like helped categorize a bee. I didn't know that. I love that.
No, and they do not regenerate stingers if they lose them. No, they can't. They cannot do that.
I love this sweat bee's little bee pant, or rather pollen pants that it has on. So we know that this guy's a pretty good pollinator.
Isn't that great? Or girl? Yes. And when they have sometimes they have fuzzy, especially back legs called corbicula. They're pollen baskets that they use to store extra pollen. And the question is, can you visually tell the difference between a male and a female bee? And in many cases, you can, depending on the species. So carpenter bees, the male carpenter bees and the female carpenter bees look the same, except for the males have a yellow dot on their face. They're very visual, and so they use that to tell each other apart when they have those weird battles in the early part of the summer and late spring. And the females have all black faces. So you could grab a male carpenter bee with a yellow face all day long. He can't sting you. He's just a big old lug. But the female would give you something to think about if you grabbed her. And bees do not usually sting each other. No, they don't. They usually only sting to protect themselves and keep themselves alive. And males, the question is, the answer is males do not have stingers. The stinger is actually the same organ that they use to lay eggs. And so it's called an ovipositor, and it's modified to deliver venom. And so that is why only female bees have stingers, because only females lay eggs.
I learned so much whenever I talk to you, Dr. Eleanor. That's incredible.
I love talking about bees. I
So
love watching them.
this next one is one that I actually saw on a walk. This is not my photo, but I did see one on a walk. And I thought it was a bee at first glance, but then I looked a little closer and it looked very strange. Can you tell us a little bit about this guy?
Oh, yeah, I can tell you about that guy. That's a robber fly. And a robber fly is a type of bee mimic. So he or she, it could be either one, looks like a bee. Doesn't it look like a bumblebee? But
Mm-hmm.
really, it's a fly. And a lot of different creatures can mimic bees. There's some flies called syrphid flies. You can see them at the farmer's market. A lot of times they like fruit and they mimic bees so that others will be afraid of them because they'll think that it's a bee and they won't get stung. But robber flies are a little bit sneakier than that because they are predators, and they're very vicious. So they sit on a perch and they capture things that land on flowers. So scientists think that robber flies in particular mimic bees so that the creatures that land on flowers will think, oh, that's a bee, nothing to worry about. Bees don't eat meat. And then robber fly will attack it and grab it and take it back to its perch and liquefy its insides and eat it up.
Wow.
They're pretty cool. And they're very, that's not poison ivy. They're pretty cool and they're very common. So don't ever grab a robber fly. They can bite. They're very hard to catch though. They're nimble in the air, but they're really fun to watch because you can always see them catch something if you follow it long enough, and they'll carry it in their long robber fly, creepy legs.
We had some really good questions about the plants. Yeah, I don't think they're poison ivy, though there are those three leaves. It does kind of look like a mint leaf. I'm not totally sure, but that's a great thing to notice. So do we think that robber flies do any pollinating since they're fuzzy? What do you think?
What are we asking, the other people or me?
Either one.
Let's see what other people think.
Do we think that this robber fly being fuzzy can still pollinate things?
They probably could if they landed on flower to flower, but another thing about being a good pollinator is that you have to go from one flower to another flower of the same species. And robber flies only land on flowers to capture their meal, and then they don't go back to the flower for a long time after the pollen probably has fallen off of their bodies.
Okay, so it's not just a fuzzy body, although it helps. It's having the habit of going from flower to flower of the same species. That's a really good distinction to have. So it could spread pollen, but maybe it's not as good a pollinator as an animal, or rather an insect, that eats the nectar from flowers.
Right. That's
Let's
why flowers are there, is to attract a pollinator to come and bring it in. That's why flowers have nectar.
let's take a quick look at just one more before we start our experiment. This one I thought was pretty cool because this beetle was covered in pollen. So beetles can be pollinators too?
Oh, beetles can be pollinators too. Something really cool about beetle pollinators is that bees evolved a long time after many plants that have flowers evolved. We have several really ancient plants that have flowers, like magnolias. Magnolias were here a long time before bees were here, and their flowers have evolved to be pollinated by beetles. So they have these little hooks, and if you look at them, you can see how the male parts come out first, and the beetles go in there and they fall into the flower, and then they roll all around and have these little beetle parties in there, and it's just so cute. You can't stop watching it. And then the female parts will come out later, and that's not even nutritious, but the beetles still think it might be the male part of the flower, so they'll roll all around, and they're super good at pollinating these plants that are so ancient, that have flowers that have bloomed just for beetles.
That is so amazing that they have this relationship that's been going on for so long. I'm gonna have to take a closer look at magnolia blossoms now to see if there's a beetle party going.
If you find a beetle party in there, just pull up a chair, because you're gonna sit there all day long.
It sounds like it would be a lot of fun. I think we have a lot more we can definitely say about pollinators. Let's go ahead and just quickly get our experiment rolling. I think once we get going, Dr. Eleanor might be able to tell us a little bit more about some of these good questions. And we also had someone send us in a really cool picture that we'd love to take a look at. This activity is just kind of it's an experiment in that we'll be trying a few different things, but it's mostly just to kind of illustrate kind of what pollination looks like. So I'm going to turn on my experiment cam here. Whoops. My experiment cam here, all right. And I'm gonna be cutting out just some little flowers. I already cut out one, but I'm just cutting out a little flower out of paper because I want to make at least 2 flowers. If I'm talking about pollinating, I want at least 2. So I'm gonna start cutting that out. And if we have that picture, I would love to take a look at that beautiful picture that we had someone send in. Do we have that one ready to pull up? Let's see if we can find this one. We'll have that picture pulled up here in just a second, but I know that we had the person who sent it in was wondering what species of beetle it was, and Dr. Eleanor was able to get a look at this picture, and we'll show it here again in a moment. But can you tell us a little bit about that beetle?
Oh, sure. So somebody was lucky enough to find a stag beetle. Has anybody ever found a stag beetle in their yard? They're real big and they're kind of purplish red. And the males have these giant mandibles that kind of look like stag or deer antlers. And so a lot of people are afraid of stag beetles, but they really shouldn't be. They just use those to have stag beetle. Oh, you haven't found one before? Well, they're really cool. And let's see, there it is. Look at that. Look at that guy. Isn't he handsome? So these guys are all males. The females look like this, but they have little bitty heads and just hang out. Yeah, Alexa's seen one. They're about maybe 2 inches long. They're our second largest beetle species in North Carolina. Our largest beetle species is the rhinoceros beetle, and they're real big and also have like a big horn, and they love to eat sap. If I catch one, I like to feed it bananas with syrup on it, and they really love it. They love to just bury their little faces in there.
That sounds delicious to me. I would eat that.
Where do you find stag beetles? You can find them anywhere in North Carolina, but the trick is that they are active at night. So you have to wait at night and look for them in woody areas. We've built our houses in a lot of their habitats, so they're not as common as they were even 10 years ago. But if you go to a wooded area or near a wooded area, you can find them. But I also see people in the middle of Raleigh, where I live, will come up and find them in their garages and driveways. They come out at night.
That's so cool. All right, so if we look maybe in some of our garages at night, we'd be able to find one. I love that.
Or your yard.
Or your yard. Good deal. So I have my 2 little flowers that I've cut out here. And I also, ahead of time, crushed up a little bit of chalk dust, and I crushed it up in 2 different colors. I have some orange chalk dust and some purple chalk dust, and I'm going to have this be my pollen in this experiment. Now, usually the pollen of the same species of flower would be the same color, right? But we want to see what happens when the pollen kind of mixes back and forth. So we want to have 2 different colors to represent the 2 different individual flowers here. Once I've got this chalk dust, I'm going to use a little bit of this paintbrush here to put the pollen on the plant. So I'm going to put it where it is on the plant here. I've got a little bit of that purple here. And then I'm going to put a little bit of the orange on this one. Here, so I've got a little bit of orange on this one. Now we're talking about pollinators being able to spread them back and forth, and we said there was something about many kinds of insect pollinators that help them spread the pollen. Do you guys remember what it was? What about their bodies can help them spread pollen? What do you think? I'm going to see if I can move these a little closer while we're thinking. Yeah, that hair, that fuzz on them. So we know that being fuzzy helps. So I'm going to ask you guys just to make a quick prediction for me. Do you think that if I'm using just stuff around the house to represent my pollinator, do you think that a Q-tip, right, this little cotton swab with a little fuzzy tip, or a paperclip is going to be better at transferring pollen? Which one do you think? Ooh, we think maybe the fuzzy one, that Q-tip. Yeah, that's a great hypothesis. Let's test it out. And we could test all sorts of different items. I also had like a pencil eraser here and a bunch of different things. But I'm going to try the paperclip first. And I'm going to bring my cam over here so we can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to have it land in my purple flower. And I'm pretending that it's drinking the nectar, and then it's going to come over here. And what do we think? Has there been much mixing back and forth? I can see it's a little hard to see here, this color, but we have a tiny bit of, oops, will my camera focus? Maybe just a little. We have a tiny bit of that purple on there, but mostly it doesn't look like it mixed them up very much, right? So I'm going to use now my Q-tip and see if that works. I'm going to start over here in the purple one, and I can already see that the chalk dust is sticking to my Q-tip a lot better. I'm going to see if it works if I put it in here. Now this one, the color is a little bit hard to see, but I don't know if you guys can tell how my Q-tip is covered in these two different colors of chalk dust. Let's see. It's having a hard time focusing on that one, but I think that your hypothesis would be correct. I think that if we have something fuzzy that picks up the pollen better, it does a little better at bringing that pollen back and forth. I'm going to go ahead and switch to my face cam here really quickly. I wanted to add one more thing to our flowers that we made. And it's something else that, that can make a good pollinator, and it's something special about their eyes or their ability to see. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of something special that some of these insects can see that we can't, Dr. Eleanor?
So bees can see a color that we can't see, and they can't see a color that we can see. Bees cannot see the color red, but they can see the color ultraviolet. So if you look at the way that we see on the color spectrum, their color spectrum of visual color has been shifted over a little bit. And so plants make secret messages for bees in ultraviolet colors.
And Monique says that bees can see different patterns, yeah, that these flowers have.
Right.
So I have an ultraviolet flashlight here. It's a different kind of UV light than the ones that these bees are seeing, because we can pick it up with our eyes. But it looks really purple, and some things show up really brightly. And one of those things that I wanted to show you all is a little bit of petroleum jelly. So that's something that fluoresces under a black light. Right, you can see that it shines really brightly. So even though to the camera it looks just kind of clearish, maybe a little bit yellowish, but it glows really brightly if we're viewing it under UV light. I'm going to put something else on my flower. I have a little bit of, this is washing up liquid. It's for washing your clothes with detergent. That's the word I'm looking for. And it looks kind of clearish, a tiny bit green to the camera. But if I put it onto my flower petals and I view it under UV light, we can see how that green shows up pretty well. I don't know, is it showing up pretty well? That sunlight is interfering. I thought it might. So I have a box here to put it in the dark so that we can see it a little bit better. Does that help us at all? It's a little hard for me to tell. Is it fluorescing?
It's fluorescing a little, yeah.
Just a little, maybe not super strongly. But we know that it does glow pretty strongly under that black light. So there's a lot of different features that make something a good pollinator. And we actually had a really interesting question about are red flowers pollinated as much by bees?
And the answer is no. If you see a red flower, you should watch who lands on it, because odds are it's not going to be a bee like a honeybee, because the flower's not blooming for that, for bees. It's blooming for some other insect or a bat. A lot of bat pollinated flowers are red. So yeah, red flowers aren't typically for bees.
That was a great prediction based on that information that we got. So that's really awesome.
That was a great prediction.
I loved that we talked so much about bees because bees are amazing and all of the different sorts of bees, but that we also talked about pollinators, insect pollinators that are not bees, because there's so many different pollinators out there. We talked a little bit about beetles. We said butterflies are good pollinators for certain kinds of flowers. Are there any others we might mention that are good pollinators that are not bees?
Hummingbirds. That's right. Hummingbirds
Ooh,
like red flowers. That's a really good point.
that's a great point.
The bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, bats, wasps. That's right. Some wasps will pollinate as well. Wasps are not all the meat-eating creatures that we think that they are. Some of them pollinate plants. They need nectar to survive. That's right. So there's a lot of great, let me see if I've forgotten anybody just in case. I think those are, oh, flies. We forgot flies. Some fly species will pollinate as well.
And some of them have even little fuzzy bits on there. So yeah, we learned about how having a fuzzy body can help you pollinate. Sometimes the ability to see those ultraviolet signals that different flowers put out. And also the dietary habits, the liking to eat things that flowers make, are all things that make you a great pollinator. That's really awesome. Dr. Eleanor, I have learned so much. I always learn even more than I think I will. And I know that I'm going to learn a lot whenever I talk to you.
It's been such a pleasure to talk with you, and it's been such a pleasure to learn from all the people that are here participating today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all so much for participating in our summer bug out. I hope that you continue the bug safaris in your backyard. We will, in our follow-up email, of course, send you a link to that playlist of amazing 1-minute bug hunt videos that Dr. Eleanor made, so you can get some entomologist tips for hunting different insects in your backyard or wherever you happen to be. Thank you for coming. Eleanor, thank you, of course, for being here all throughout this bug out, and for helping us learn so much about different kinds of bugs, insects, arachnids, all of the above.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
It's awesome. Thank you all so much. We, of course, have our labs at home every week, Wednesday at 2 p.m., except for next week. Next week, we are getting our camps started. So we are going to skip that week in lab at home, but we will be back the week after next. And we'll remind you all in that email that we send out afterward. That'll also include some of the curriculum that we used for today's experiment activity with the different flowers and chalk dust. But thank you all so much for being here. We look forward to seeing you not next week, but the week after that. Awesome. Thank you all so much. We'll see you later, friends.
Bye.
Bye.